Good morning, everyone. It's my honor to have a chance to talk with all of you. And what I'll do first is just provide a bit of a summary of the report and of our recommendations. The first thing that I think is important to say about what the council recommended is that we did everything we could to orient the recommendations toward the improvement of teaching and learning. So at many points where we had decisions to make about what recommendations to make, we thought about what would be in support of improving instruction in the state of Michigan. So, for example, one of the things we did was to look carefully at observation tools, which was one of the things that we were supposed to be recommending. And we looked to see the way in which different observation tools would improve the ways that principals would have support in the kind of guidance about what to look for in teaching, what kind of feedback to give to teachers. And we emphasized the importance of a tool that could provide a kind of checklist for looking at instruction that would provide both teachers and principals and other people involved in the process with much better frameworks for looking at teaching. I think many of you know that we conducted a pilot study of 4 tools that were broadly used in the country, and we learned a great deal from the districts that were wonderful enough to participate in the pilot. So they gave us an opportunity to learn how did these tools function on the ground, what was involved in learning them, how did teachers and school administrators experience them, what kind of support did they provide for high quality observing of instruction and feedback. And what we learned from that is that the tools that we piloted, I think many of you know which ones those were, Charlotte Danielson's Framework for Teaching, Marzano, 4D, 4 dimensions, and the fourth one, and we piloted those all in districts around the state, and we learned that they all actually provide very useful guidance for principals and teachers. So in the end, that was useful for us because we were able to recommend that any one of those tools would be a suitable tool for use in the state. And this puts the state in a better position because had we only recommended one tool, then the opportunity to bid competitively for which one would provide the services, the tool, the training, we would have been in a much less competitive position. So the tool that will end up being the state recommended tool will depend on which vendor is able to provide a really competitive bid with all of the specifications that the council required, including high quality training, which we thought of as really vital. A tool by itself can't do everything, not even close to everything. What's very important is the opportunity for learning of those people, principals, in fact, and other school administrators who would be involved in conducting the observations. Another thing we learned from the pilot study and from other research is that you can't get a reliable estimate of a teacher's skill in teaching unless you observe multiple times. And so the recommendations do require that teachers be observed multiple times across the school year and at some interval that allows the total observational kind of measurement to be something that gives a sense of over time of the way the teacher is teaching. We did allow for there to be other observers besides principals. There were a couple of reasons besides for this. One was that principals have a terrifically difficult job, and I'm saying principals, but of course I mean school administrators broadly, in that they are not only having to observe teachers multiple times, but obviously are also observing teachers in subject areas and in kinds and levels of teaching that may not conform to their own background or experience, which is very, very challenging. And while we know that people do learn to do this and do it well, we thought it could be useful to allow districts to permit others to be involved in some of the observations per year, although we do require that the school administrator is doing at least one of those per year. So we know that we've recommended something that will increase the work for school administrators, and at the same time we've tried very hard to recommend support, resources, training that will make the responsibilities involved in observing teachers better supported than it has been in the past. So that's one whole area of our recommendations has to do with the support for observing teachers. The second area that I think people are particularly concerned with is the new requirement that there be student growth as part of teachers' evaluation and of school administrators' evaluation for that matter. And the council spent a great deal of time learning about what are some of the ways in which what is growth, first of all? How is that different from just looking at achievement? There's a lot of confusion about that. For example, growth doesn't mean you just look at how many kids are at grade level or what grades they get. You're actually looking at change in children over time that can be attributed to the skill of the teaching. And that sounds great, but isn't actually all that easy to do. Where there are standardized tests that can be administered, there are statistical methods that are called value-added models that provide a statistical method of trying to isolate the skill of the teacher and be able to take account of things that are not under the control of the teacher, like student absenteeism or the student's own educational history prior to entering the class. A whole variety of factors that influence student achievement and student growth, but aren't under the control of the teacher. So value-added models are a set of statistical techniques that attempt to regularize that in a disciplined way. But first of all, those techniques aren't perfect, and there's a lot of controversy about them. But moreover, many teachers obviously teach in areas in which there are no standardized tests, and we call these non-tested subjects, or grade levels at which we don't administer those tests. So the council took seriously how we could consider the concept of growth and the concept of attributing growth to the teacher to develop a set of recommendations that would allow there to be attention to student growth without doing something that would be unfair to teachers or students. We were also concerned about the influence of testing, and that testing, particularly testing that's not aligned well enough with the goals we have for students, can actually distort instruction as teachers and kids chase test scores. So we were sensitive to that controversy in the recommendations that we made. Finally, what I'd like to say is that we changed the categories of ratings for teachers. The original ratings that the legislature had suggested, which are similar to those used around the country, broke teacher ratings into 4 categories: highly effective, effective, minimally effective, and ineffective. And we ended up, by looking at the difficulties with trying to make 4 categories of that sort, recommending only 3 that I think many of you have seen by now as ineffective, provisional, and professional. Those do align with the terms we use for certification in the state of Michigan, but they are not the same thing as certification levels. They are actually categories of performance. So ineffective would be a teacher who is overall performing poorly on the observation over time within the school year, and it also has inadequate student growth. And the recommendations specify that a teacher who receives an ineffective rating as a function of both student growth and the observational scores would have 2 years to improve his or her instruction or be terminated. We anticipate that this will not be a large group of teachers. Nationally, the number of teachers who fall into a category like this is small, and at the same time, very important to isolate and identify them, because these are people who effectively aren't helping students to learn consistently in any reasonable way. The next category is a category that we heard, particularly I think from school administrators, would be a helpful category to have, and we call this provisional. These are people who have an uneven performance. Some of their observations may indicate some strengths, but there are significant weaknesses in the way they're teaching, and their student growth, while there may be student growth in some areas, is also inconsistent and uneven, and their overall performance raises some pretty significant concern. They're not as weak as the ineffective teachers who are overall just consistently doing poorly, but these are people whom the council determined that upon receiving a provisional rating would have 3 years to improve their rating or also be counseled out of the profession. So we tried to signal a category of serious need of improvement that we thought would be helpful in trying to improve the quality of teaching overall. You'll notice that I'm also saying in both of these cases, even for teachers who are rated as performing less well, that the significant emphasis is not on penalties, but on direct help and specific feedback to help them improve. The final category that we used was professional, and professional indicates a teacher who, while like all teachers will have some areas of strength and some areas that are less strong, is overall performing above the standard of what we would expect teachers to be able to perform. The students are growing. Many of the observational indicators show that they teach consistently well, but every one of those teachers, we believe, would also have areas in which they can improve. And so the professional rating will always be accompanied by specific feedback for improvement. We wanted to remove the notion of improvement from something that's given to people who seem to be in trouble, and instead install improvement as a regular part of the evaluation system, so that every year a teacher, even those teachers who reach the provisional rating, we expect that number to be large, and we hope it will grow, but that those people would every year get suggestions for improvement. And here the tools are actually quite important, the observation tools, because we tried, as I said at the beginning, to pick tools that would provide support for providing much more specific feedback. And in the training recommendations that we made for school administrators, we also acknowledge that good feedback is hard to give well, and that feedback is one of the areas in which it would help school leaders to be provided with opportunities to learn how to do that better. So I'll stop there, and I'd like to, at this point, introduce my colleague, Jenny Hammond, who is a principal at Grand Blanc High School and was a key member of the council, and ask her to make some comments about our work. Jenny?
Thank you, Deborah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I want to start by expressing my appreciation to my fellow council members, and I am sure there will be many questions from the audience and from educators throughout the state, even maybe criticism. I think it's important that the audience know we all as council members spend a lot of time discussing, debating, and really thoughtfully crafting our recommendations. The council was very diligent and committed to providing recommendations that I truly believe will help improve teaching and learning throughout our state. When the teacher tenure law was written, as a principal, I made some changes to my own practice in preparation for the implementation of the new educator evaluation criteria. And as everyone knows, in the 2011-12 school year, it was the first time every educator was to be reported as highly effective, effective, minimally effective, or ineffective. That school year in Grand Blanc, we decided to evaluate every teacher, which meant for me evaluating over 130 teachers in our own building, in our own high school. So this was a huge change in terms of our evaluation practices, because typically we only evaluated about a third of our staff, so maybe 40 or 50 people. I'm fortunate to have 3 assistant principals who also conduct teacher observations, but I really felt that first year that they were still busy doing attendance and discipline and all of those AP duties. So I didn't want to put an additional burden on their responsibility. So what I decided to do that first year was conduct a bulk of the evaluations myself. And so I evaluated almost 100 teachers in that 2011-12 school year. Now, I know this might seem extreme, and believe me, most of my time during the day was spent in classrooms. But that was where I should have been spending all of my time all along. Not only was it the first year and it was difficult because of the volume of observations I needed to conduct, but also we had adopted a new observation tool, along with a section that actually focused on student achievement, which understandably caused anxiety for many of our teachers. So the first year was certainly a learning year. This past year, the 2012-13 year, was much better. The assistant principals took on additional teacher evaluations. The teachers were more familiar with the observation tool and the student achievement goals. I think the familiarity of the observation tool allowed all of us to go deeper into understanding the vocabulary, the standards, and the expectations. We also, the assistant principals and I, visited classrooms together, so we were coding and scripting lessons in a more reliable manner. I found myself becoming more adept at coding and watching lessons, but also adept at having those post-observation conversations where I was much more honest and reflective with the teacher, and hopefully providing them with more ways to improve their practice. And although my experience may be unique, I believe that most building administrators will appreciate the training that's associated with the council's recommendations and the common vocabulary and expectations of the 4 tools that we've recommended. So that's a little bit in terms of my experience so far, and next up is Tom English.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Jenny, and welcome to. I have an interesting perspective to share, not as a member of any board with the MCEE, as you've already been in. We, North Branch Area Schools, were one of the lucky 13 who were able to experience teacher observation model with iObservation as the observation tool. Interestingly, North Branch has Danielson District until just last summer, July 2012, when we were the lucky recipients of the honor of participating in this pilot. We, small administrative team, we have roughly 2,400 students here, really had our work cut out for us, because switching from one teacher observation protocol to another meant we had a lot of quick training to do. So the month of August and September, through the support of the pilot, and then a lot of time went into getting up to speed on the Marzano protocol. A couple of takeaways now after we look back, my administrative team and I. What must North Branch do as a result of going down the road with Marzano's teacher innovation protocol? One was develop a common language of teaching. We obviously, but coming in sort of cold turkey at the last minute, we had to figure out a way to roll out the new vocabulary terms associated with a different protocol. So that takes a lot of time, and obviously Marzano's book, Art Science of Teaching, was pretty instrumental as we rushed through that a little bit. Second thing for takeaway was we need to provide opportunities for focused feedback and practice for our teachers. I heard Jenny talk about how this last year she was able to have more conversations with teachers, and that's exactly what we need to be about. Providing opportunities for observing and discussing effective teachers between teachers is a key takeaway, and changing a little bit of the culture that we're used to here. We find and understand through research that is a very valuable tool. And the last thing is to require individual teaching plans on a yearly basis. So those are our big takeaways. Now we have to figure out how to get done, because our staff, 125 teachers or principals, have an awful lot to do, but it's exactly what we need to be doing. So first and foremost, implement a common language. Secondly, our takeaway was to implement incrementally. Ideally, this could be a 2 to 3 year process. Second year, implementing maybe of the protocol, and then the third year possibly implementing a little bit more or complete package. And our final thought over is we really focused hard in North Branch on focusing on professional growth rather than measurement. A lot of apprehension and anxiety in the air over the process, not just in North Branch, I believe statewide. The real intent behind this for us is to make sure we have the very best teachers, and we want our teachers supported. So focusing on growth rather than the measurement, which I realize is maybe more expected from the state end, is really where we want to go. So I'm not sure if Dr. Martinaw is here, but I will turn it back to Mike Turner, who will moderate the Q&A, and if he needs to switch the agenda because Dr. Martinaw was able to join, then great. If not, be on the line for the opportunity to share.
This is Joseph Martinaw. Can I get confirmation that someone can hear me? Thank you. I was able to join. Thank you for
Yes, hello, I'm back. And I'd like to repeat again the email address for submitting questions. We're ready to begin the Q&A portion of our session. And the email address, again, is waters@thisisspace.com, WATERS@thisisspace.com. Also, if you'd like to go on the MCEE website, www.mceee.org, and there's a space, or there's a tab there, contact us, and you can submit a question that way. Our first question goes to Dr. Hall, and it is, what is the process to file a waiver for the administration tool?
That process is...
The question says that we are implementing Marzano with our teachers, and like vertical alignment with the administration tool for Marzano as well. Dr. Hall?
So just to be clear, the question is how to ask for a waiver with the administrator evaluation tool?
Yes.
Well, the process for submitting waiver requests is detailed in the report. And basically what we tried to do is to specify what the principles are that PRINCIPLES that districts would have to demonstrate to show that they had an alternative to the state recommended tools that had the same degrees of rigor, research base, and so on that are in the state recommended tools. So essentially a district that wanted to use something different would have to be able to provide evidence that what they have has the kind of basis and can meet the standards of those tools that are being recommended at the state level. And that would be no different for the administrator tool than for anything else.
Okay, thank you. And our next question will go to Jennifer Hammond. And the question is, what are qualified peers who may conduct some of the teacher observations?
Part in our report
does say that qualified peers conduct
some of the observations.
It's important that everyone understands that a decision that is up to the district
to decide
if they want teacher leaders to help conduct some of those observations.
We set forth some guidelines. One of the guidelines was that the qualified peers would have to be someone who was rated as professional over a few years of their own evaluation. Also, someone that the administrator would select to help do those observations. And one of the other requirements was that the qualified peer would have to be trained in the observational protocol just as an administrator would be. But again, that is really left up to the local district if they want teacher leaders to help with that process. I believe as a building principal, it would be important, especially for some of our new teachers that are coming in. I'm relatively adept, but I am no expert in, say, Chinese, French, German. And so it would be for maybe a mentor teacher to help some of the newer teachers acclimate to our expectations at our building.
Okay, and our third question for Dr. Hall is, what recommendations do you have for the 2013-14 school year for districts currently using an observation tool not on the recommended list?
That's a good question. We tried to build into our recommendations an acknowledgement of the time it will take both the state and districts to do the different things that will be necessary to have in place to have the, if our recommendations go into effect, to have those ready to go in the school year 2015-16. So a school district that's using some tool that's not on the recommended list probably doesn't want to switch to another tool before it's clear which tool is in fact going to be selected. That would be sort of a waste of learning effort. But because some of the things that will be required, like being able to observe teachers more frequently, perhaps, than has been done in all districts, or at least in different ways, maybe thinking a bit about the improvement orientation and thinking about what might be involved in that, districts could begin to think about reorienting some of their work, if that's appropriate, given how they have been working toward this spirit of improvement. But in terms of selecting a different tool, that wouldn't be a particularly good decision before it's clear which tool will be the one selected by the state.
Mike, can I add a little bit One thing in 2011-12,
we had teachers and administrators create goals. And the first year that we did that, it was pretty painful,
but it was
a learning curve for everyone. And then when we did it the second year, it was much easier.
so if there's
So
a
if there's
district
a district out there that is looking to
prepare
prepare for what is coming, one thing they might want to consider is the implementation of those student learning outcomes.
There is
a training available yet, but there are some resources that we have on our website that districts could review
to help
and get their staff ready for
what's coming, or
or at least a little bit of what's coming.
Okay, thank you. And our fourth question, also for Dr. Hall, is please explain your recommendation for state funding for districts that use one of the free observation tool vendors that does not get the state bid.
What our recommendation specifies that a certain level of funding, sort of base funding, would be provided to districts that are using one of the other recommended tools, not the state-selected tools, but that there will be some kinds of services and support that will be provided through the state tool because it will have an economy of scale, that if a district uses a different tool, there will be some cost that they will have to bear. But there will be financial support across the tools, at least if our recommendations are adopted.
And again, I'll repeat the email address for our committee question, waters@thisispace.com. Our next question is again for Dr. Ball. For provisional rated teachers, is the council recommending that after 3 years, this individual is quote unquote canceled out, or would the recommendation be mandatory termination?
The language we used was counseled out. We think that somebody who gets a rating 3 years in a row and isn't improving out of that category has significant difficulties, not only in teaching, but in responding to focused efforts at improvement, which is the reason we thought this was important to include. Because our recommendations aren't just that a teacher gets a rating and is told next year we'll check you again, but in fact what's very important, I think, about our recommendations is that that rating, when one receives it, is accompanied by even more specific plans for improvement than teachers would ordinarily be getting. And as I said earlier, we're really recommending a strong emphasis on improvement. So a teacher who hasn't improved after that kind of concerted effort is clearly somebody who is not improving in the way that children deserve. And so that's why we use that language. Jenny, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you captured some of what we talked about. And I think when Deborah did your introduction, you hit this very nicely. That provisional category is a place where kind of a warning area that says for the teacher and the administrator, there needs to be some improvement, and there are some consequences if over time and after support, and then something will happen after that certain time frame. But you're right. I remember that conversation, and we were very careful about what language we used.
Okay, we will direct our next question to Joseph. Is there an expected date when the Michigan Department of Education will make its formal recommendations for which of the 4 tools that they will be supporting? If so, when? Is there any information about which tool they may be leaning for?
We don't have any information about a tool that we would be leaning toward. The MCEE did feel that all 4 of the teacher observation frameworks or tools were sufficiently supported with evidence that we could move forward with them. So we would really be opening this up for a free and fair bid among the 4 that were identified as recommended candidates. Timing is much more murky because we cannot open a request for proposals until we have appropriations from the legislature that would allow us to pay for a contract with any one of the vendors. So our anticipation would be that we would, as soon as we receive appropriations that would allow us to issue an RFP, we would issue that RFP as soon as possible within the constraints of the kinds of things that we have to take care of in state government, and issue a contract as soon as possible after that. So that usually takes between 6 to 9 months in state government to be able to put together a proposal, a request for proposals, get bids back from vendors, and then make an award. So we would be anticipating 6 to 9 months, maybe even longer, given the potential size of the contract, after we receive appropriations allowing us to move forward with this kind of contracting activity.
Okay, thank you. The next question is actually two questions included here, and I can kind of handle the first one. Are copies of the administrator tools also on the MCEE website? And I tell you that there are fact sheets that explain them and links to the companies if you want to explore them more in depth that are available. The second part of the question is addressed to Dr. Ball. What is the time frame for the legislature?
Well, I can't really speak to that because that will depend on their deliberating about the report, presumably holding hearings of various kinds. I mean, they'll be receiving this, they have received the report, and they will need to do the kind of thinking required on their part to figure out how they want to move forward. I know that they're beginning to schedule those. I know that we've heard from leaders on both sides of the legislature that they're committed to moving forward with this, but I wouldn't want to imply that anything about rushing them, because this took us time to learn, and they're going to have to dig into it and think carefully about what they hear about it and what they think they should do to move forward. So I don't have information about their timeline.
Okay. And another question addressed to Dr. Ball also will ask you to sort of address an issue before the legislature also. Is Representative Lunn's bill requiring teacher and administrator salaries to be based solely on performance going to see any traction in the committee?
Well, as you know, we recommended that for the educator evaluation system that we spent so much time learning about and then recommending, we recommended that to tie that to teacher salaries, sometimes called merit pay or pay for performance, would be a mistake. And we had a couple of reasons for that, which I'll just briefly remind everyone of. One had to do with the very, very inconclusive research on teacher performance pay, actually unconvincing and underwhelming, I think I've called it in other places, and I think anyone interested in this should really be careful to read the research on how that does and does not work well. That said, a completely different reason has less to do with what you believe about performance pay and has more to do that if you look at our recommendations, there would be no way to tie them to performance pay, because to do that you would actually need some system of ranking teachers with scores, and our system groups teachers into 3 ratings: professional, provisional, and ineffective, as we've already discussed. So it's not obvious at all how you would tie that to any system of performance pay. We did not build a system that was to be tied to that. If districts or others want to pursue that, they can do that, and they should read the research. But our system does not align with it, and would not be would not conform well with our orientation toward improvement.
Okay, thank you. We'll direct this question to Jennifer Mann. Are you requiring the district to retain provisional teachers for 3 years, or could we support a counseling out after 2 years if the district has provided supports? And just to put it in context, this also becomes important if districts must lay off staff.
Well, that's a complicated
question. I think
they're asking
whether or not you must do it. I think that is. I mean, we all have teachers. I've had teachers that sometimes you do counsel them out of their role after their first year.
But we're talking
about counseling them, not mandating termination at any point.
In terms of layoff, I would imagine that a professional teacher, when you're laying off, would rate higher than one that's provisional. So hopefully that answers the question, but I would see it as, first of all, it's the district and building's decision when they would counsel someone out of their role. And then second would be, in terms of layoff, a professional educator would rank higher because they're meeting those standards more than the teacher that's at the provisional rating.
Can I just add one thing to that? One reason that we ended up recommending the 3 years was that if you imagine a teacher getting a provisional rating at the end of the first year, to say that the teacher would be counseled at the second year would be within only less than a full year of effort to make improvement, which is why we ended up saying 3. We can understand that that might be a discussable item, but we were concerned of ensuring that the teacher was actually given sufficient time to improve. Because remember, these aren't the teachers who are deeply unskilled. These are teachers who are uneven, and we believe many of them with focused improvement will get to be professional teachers.
Thank you. We'll direct this question to Tom English from North Branch Area Schools, and it's based on your initial discussion of the need for common language for the teacher evaluation process. The person submitting the question says that we see this as critical in the alignment with the teacher and administrator evaluation tool and process. Could you speak to this issue as it relates to the recommendations for teacher and administrator evaluation tools?
Well, first of all, I don't know if my video is operational.
I hope you can hear my voice.
Yes. Well,
oh, great. Thank you. So I apologize for those technical issues on my end. In terms of a common language or vocabulary, it really, I don't want to make this sound too simplified, but it really is essential to good teaching and learning in the classroom, and it translates all the way through to what is good teaching and instruction look like. So it's really about no surprises. We want our students to completely understand what it is they're to learn and to know and to be able to do, and likewise with our teachers and administrators. I should clarify, I think the question asked to tie the teacher as well as the administrator the observation and evaluation protocol together. We did not in North Branch. We weren't able to go down the administrator road. So we only have exposure and experience with the Marzano protocol. And again, the common vocabulary is, I would emphasize the word essential to whatever protocol your district goes on, so that everyone clearly understands what it is they need to know and be able to do, whether it's a student in the classroom or a teacher or an administrator.
Okay. This question is directed for Joseph. What research did council find supported the recommendation for DAL? The research generally finds that current grants are very volatile and be built to provide whatever results the curriculum wants. This indicates a lack of reliability and validity of this reason not ready for high stakes use.
And there are a couple of things there. One is as Dr. Ball said at the beginning, there is a lot of controversy around that. There has been a lot of progress made over the last several years in terms of looking at appropriate uses of value-added modeling. And we did bring in several people who have had, or several pieces of research that around that. We did bring in Daniel McCaffrey from Brand Corporation to speak with us about that. And that's actually one of the reasons that we did not go in the direction that some states have gone in, which says that student growth measures or value-added measures must account for 35-50% of an educator's evaluation. They account for a portion of the evaluation that is based on student growth, which is also based on additional things, additional growth measures, student learning objectives, and so on. And there is quite a bit of still unsettled research in terms of value-added models. One of the things that we did find, however, is that value-added model analyses actually are less volatile than the educator observation metrics. And so kind of no matter which way you go, there is some volatility. But there's also important information in both of those things. There's important information in the amount of growth that an individual educator students are observed to make. There's important information in the observation metrics that talk about the quality of the instruction that's going on in the classroom. So simply because there's more noise than we would like for there to be in a metric doesn't mean that we don't use the metric. And that's one of the balances that the MCEE was trying to strike, was making sure that we use these things in an appropriate manner, that we don't base everything on something, all of the entire evaluation of the entire portion based on student growth on one metric that may have some noise in it. So that's kind of the direction that we took with that particular issue.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder, we have for about 15 minutes left here in our town hall, and if you'd like to submit a question again, the address is waters@thisispace.com, or go on to the MCEE website, and under the contact tab, you'll find a way to submit a question that way. The address for that is www.mced.org. Okay. Our next question is directed for Dr. Ball. Again, it deals with timing of implementation. Is there a better idea of a timeline for the teacher evaluation rubric? And when can we expect a hard version or at least some form of guidelines for the superintendent evaluations?
I'm not sure if there's an additional question there about the timeline for the teacher evaluation. I think Joseph was explaining that the way that the council recommended the selection of the teacher observation tool was dependent on bids that we would receive back from the state would receive back from vendors that would put the state in a competitive position to get the services and tools and resources that we'll need in the state at a fair price, and that depends on appropriations. So I don't think there's more that we have to add about the timeline for that, because there are a number of events that will have to take place in an order that we can't really predict.
Okay, very good. We'll direct this question to Jennifer. I'm wondering what in Michigan law outlines the qualifications for teacher evaluations. Is it acceptable to have department chairs evaluate teachers, or is it only individuals certified as administrators?
Well, I think that
goes back to the question you asked earlier, Mike. I think that it's a local decision to make. And if schools are like my school, I think we're a few years away from being very comfortable with that. But personally,
if I were to select some teachers to help, I would select some of my department chairs who have experience, know their department members well. In terms of the law, that I would refer someone to Regal. I don't know that like the back of my hand, but in terms of recommendations, I think it's a local decision to make, whether that's a classroom teacher, maybe it might be an instructional coach. I know some districts have instructional coaches, but I certainly would rely on someone like my department chairs, because they have the expertise, they have the relationships also with the members of their department.
Okay, thank you. We have another question here. Is there a portion of the evaluation that is tied to professional development?
The districts do have some option to add other considerations to the mix, but those recommended by the council were exclusively focused on the teacher observations for teachers and on growth, student growth. And as Joseph said earlier, on student growth, we included several different things to comprise the growth estimate. And on observation, the only thing we specified was observations. Districts are free to a small percentage to add other considerations in, but we did not specify that.
Can I add something to that? There is something new too that's part of the legislation that says at the end of a summative evaluation, an administrator and teacher will create two goals for the next school year. And those goals, I'm imagining, will involve some professional development to help the teacher meet those goals. Those might be performance goals, it might be, student achievement goals, but there is something that happens at the end of the year. And I was imagining that would help then frame the professional development for that particular teacher for the next school year.
Yeah, I misunderstood the question if that's the case, because Jenny's completely right. I thought we were being asked, does the teacher's participation in professional development, is that included in the way that he or she is evaluated? Because some certainly have talked about that, and we did not. But Jenny's right. In fact, our entire improvement orientation implies that, in fact, requires that there be direct and careful, detailed feedback that can help teachers to continue to develop.
Okay, thank you. We have a question coming in. Okay. And Dr. Ball, could you explain more the rationale for the elimination of the quote-unquote highly effective rating?
Yeah.
It's a two-part question. What is the incentive for professional teachers to strive for a higher level of expertise?
Yeah, so we had a couple of reasons. One is something that Joseph mentioned, which is the difficulty of sorting teachers into 4 categories is well known. And in fact, of course, for those of you who follow this, what's most reliable is to isolate people at the tail. So you can identify more reliably people who are really seriously ineffective. And it is possible to identify some people who are considerably at the high end. So our judgment, we worried a lot about the middle because most teachers obviously will be in the middle. And we worried about trying to build a system that was much more oriented toward improvement and less about competing to get a rating. So in our view, it came in some sense out of our view of instruction that professional is the goal to which people should be striving and that should always be accompanied by a sense in which one can always get better. All of the people on the council have taught. I myself have taught for many years. I've never felt as though I've gotten to a point where I'm done. I just finished teaching for 2 weeks. I can tell you there are many areas in which I can continue to improve. So we oriented toward improvement and less toward earning like an A+. That doesn't mean that a district might not choose to have some method for recognizing teachers who get just considerably high amounts of student growth and who are contributing in a number of different ways in the school district, whose observations are consistently extremely high quality. Nothing stops a district from doing that, but in building a statewide system, we decided, given everything we learned about the statistics and the substantive goals we had, to focus instead on this this method of rating that we thought would lead much more to significant focus on professional improvement over time.
Okay. And we have some more questions coming in here. Again, 10 minutes to go. And the email address is waters@thisispace.com. Okay. And here we have a bit of a geographic question. And I'll leave this open to whoever feels comfortable to answer it. There are many administrators in the Upper Peninsula who are in dual roles. For example, superintendent and principal at the same time. Will there be an evaluation to address administrators in dual roles?
I don't know that there would be a different tool, and Jenny may want to comment on this. I think that because the administrator evaluation is tied to specific areas of work in which the leader is working, and someone in a dual role, that would be reflected in the way that the focus of their evaluation, because their responsibilities would be somewhat different than someone who is in a district with many school administrators. So I think that would be reflected well in the way that we set up the system to focus on the individual's work. But Jenny, you may want to add something to that.
You're correct.
Both of the administrative tools that we recommended, when we looked at them carefully, we thought that they could apply to many different roles. So maybe an administrator had 2 roles, or maybe when we're talking to different, say, district curriculum director, and building principal, superintendent, schools that are recommended could be for any and all of those positions. Obviously, if there is an area in the evaluation tool that doesn't apply to that particular job responsibilities, then it wouldn't apply. But we felt those tools were comprehensive enough that could be used in any of those roles.
Thank you. This is a follow-up on our question from Thomas English. The first person who asked the question wanted to maybe more directly word the question. And here's the direct approach, more direct approach. Why did the MCEE choose not to recommend teacher administrator tools that are aligned and have common language, such as Marzano and Amazon? And I know Tom, you weren't directly involved with those decisions, so just a follow-up to the question that was asked, Dr. Burrow, perhaps another MCEE board member could also chime in.
I would defer to them because I really couldn't speak to that.
What we did in both cases was look to find tools that we thought would best support the nature of the kind of evaluation that these professionals require. And while I could not agree more with Tom about the importance of common language. I think it's one of the really key areas of the work. It doesn't necessarily follow that the tool has to be the same. The work of school leaders and the work of teachers is not identical, and language wasn't the only thing we were looking at. We were looking at things that have been demonstrated to work well, to be reliable, to be sources of useful feedback. So while that's a very good question, there were other things on our mind as we evaluated what was available. Jenny, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think we, as I mentioned before, we very carefully administered the tool, and the two that were recommended seemed to meet the needs of multiple administrators, and so that's why those two were chosen. That's what I recall.
Okay, we have 5 minutes to go, and we'll direct this question to Joseph. Given all of the proposed changes, is it safe to assume that all teacher and administrator evaluation language within the school code remains in effect and should guide our work this year?
Our understanding is that unless there is very quick action by the legislature to postpone dates or to move back deadlines, that the current legislation would stand. We would hope that there would be some kind of action that would, quick action and then follow-up action that would allow for those deadlines to be pushed back. But that, of course, depends on the legislature taking action quickly. We don't know. We haven't heard anything about whether or not that is likely to happen. So our anticipation is that for the moment, the current legislation stands.
Okay, thank you. We'll direct this question to Dr. Ball. For those districts not implementing a state recommendation evaluation tool due to previous contracts, would it be viable to select another school district's locally developed model that does meet the state requirements due to financial commitment of purchasing a model that may not be selected? And a little editorial comment, the question says he's looking for a Band-Aid.
Looking for what?
A Band-Aid.
I guess, if I'm understanding the question correctly, it would seem not a great idea to me to switch to another tool right now, because it would seem that a district using a tool that's not one of the 4 will want to see which of the 4 is selected, and likely will want to use one for which full financial support will be provided and training and the like. So I don't really understand what the reasoning would be to switch to another district-developed tool, since the incentives for choosing one's own tool won't be very high if these recommendations are put into place.
Okay. Okay, we're winding down here. We have another question for Dr. Ball. Has there been discussion of adding those teachers not eligible to tenure, such as occupational therapists, physical therapists, psychologists, to this evaluation system?
We didn't talk about that. There may be discussion of how broadly to go, but we didn't talk about that. We thought there was plenty to talk about with the people who were in purview of this policy.
Okay, we're just about out of time, and again, if you think of a question you'd like to ask after we wrap up here, we encourage you to go to the MCEE website, which is www.mcede.org. Pretty self-explanatory from there. There's your contact tab. Fill in the appropriate blanks, and we will get you an answer to whatever question you have. Okay. Okay, and if anyone would like to make some concluding remarks, we're pretty much ready to wrap things up, I believe.
I think the only thing I would say is that the kinds of questions that we're best able to answer are to explain how we ended up with the recommendations we did and the central orientation we took. And I think that's a takeaway I hope that people who participated today will get. We were really committed to building a system we thought would be feasible and fair, and that would promote improvement of instruction as opposed to judging it or punishing it or sorting teachers. And that is a very particular stance we took, and we did everything we could to build a report that was coherent that way. Questions about how it will be taken up were encouraged by the early reactions that we've heard, but there's a kind of handoff now to others who will have to take it forward. So it's hard for us to speak to questions like implementation, precisely what will happen. We did make a number of recommendations about what should happen, but we're hopeful, and those are the questions I think that we're best able to explain as how we set up the process to go into motion.
Okay, thank you. And just also want to let everyone know that the webcast has been recorded and it will be available for viewing on the MCEE website. So if there's anything that you'd like to go back, further clarification, it will be available tomorrow. By tomorrow, we will have that posted on the website. Thank you for participating, everybody.
Thank you, Mike.